To everyone else, he was just another sailor. But few knew the truth. Jamal Bryant was the heir to the largest fleet on the coast, determined to prove his worth without the weight of his family name. Captain Roger Walters, a man who hid his deep-seated prejudice behind a hardened exterior, humiliated Jamal at every turn, making it clear that skin color could still be a sentence, even on the open sea. But when a deadly storm struck, threatening to destroy the ship and its crew, it was Jamal who risked everything to save them, taking command in the chaos. What followed wasn't just a clash of pride, it was a reckoning that changed the lives of everyone on board. What happened next stunned even the most seasoned sailors. But let's start from the beginning. The sun-drenched harbor bustled with life as seagulls screeched overhead and dockworkers hauled crates onto waiting ships. Among the crowd, a tall, broad-shouldered young man strode confidently toward the gangplank of the Eagle's Grace, one of the largest merchant vessels docked that day. This was 25-year-old Jamal Bryant. His close-cropped curls glistened with sweat in the midday heat, and his skin, toughened by years spent braving the elements, told of a life already rich with experience. Despite his youth, there was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself, a demeanor that turned heads even in a bustling port. What no one knew, however, was that Jamal wasn't just another sailor looking for work. He was the son of James Bryant Sr., the owner of the largest shipping fleet on the East Coast. Born into privilege, Jamal had rejected an easy life in his father's shadow. Instead, he chose to earn his stripes the hard way, determined to prove, to his father, the world, and himself, that he could succeed on his own terms. As Jamal reached the deck of the Eagle's Grace, the sharp bark of Captain Roger Walters cut through the air. Roger, 55 years old, stood on the bridge with an air of authority that brooked no challenge. His aristocratic features, sharp nose, pale skin weathered from decades at sea, and piercing blue eyes belied a reputation for being as ruthless with his words as he was with his crew. His neatly combed silver hair only added to the intimidating presence. Though respected for his maritime skill, Captain Walters was equally infamous for his brash temper and an underlying bias that had driven more than one sailor off his ship in frustration. Jamal barely had time to set down his duffel bag before Roger's voice thundered across the deck. "Hey you, new guy!" Roger jabbed a finger in Jamal's direction, his voice laced with disdain. "Move like that and we'll all be dead before the tide turns. What's the matter? Your last ship a banana boat?" The deckhands froze, caught between their captain's wrath and the awkward silence that followed. A few dared to chuckle nervously, their laughter more about self-preservation than genuine amusement. Jamal, however, stood stock still. His jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the strap of his bag. He wanted to say something, anything, to defend himself. The sting of the insult burned in his chest, but he swallowed hard and exhaled slowly. No, not yet. Not like this. He wasn't here for petty confrontations. He was here to work, to prove his worth with action, not words. "Don't just stand there," Roger snapped, slamming his hand on the railing. "Get to work or you can swim back to shore." Jamal met Roger's gaze, his dark brown eyes steady and unyielding. Without a word, he hoisted his bag onto his shoulder and headed below deck, ignoring the whispers and sideways glances from the other sailors. He could feel their eyes on him, judging, questioning. But he didn't care. He had a job to do, and no amount of ridicule would stop him from doing it. As he disappeared into the ship's depths, Roger watched him go, a sour look etched on his face. "These young ones," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for the first mate to hear. "Think they can step onto my ship and act like they own the place." Down below, Jamal stowed his belongings in the cramped quarters he now shared with 4 other deckhands. He sat on the edge of his bunk, taking a moment to steady himself. He'd been here before, in other ports, on other ships, facing the same kind of subtle and not so subtle prejudice. But this time, it felt different. The stakes were higher, the challenge greater. He clenched his fists, a determined spark lighting in his eyes. If Captain Roger Walters thought he could break him, he was in for a surprise. Jamal Bryant wasn't here to survive. He was here to thrive. Jamal quickly proved himself to be a hard-working and skilled sailor. He moved with quiet confidence, completing tasks with precision, and stepping up whenever the crew faced challenges. Whether it was rigging the sails or patching a leak, Jamal worked tirelessly, often volunteering for extra shifts to ensure the ship stayed on course. His fellow sailors began to take notice. At first, they were cautious, unsure of what to make of him, but over time, their respect grew. Jamal's decisiveness during critical moments earned him a reputation for reliability, something that didn't go unnoticed. But while the crew started warming to him, Captain Roger Walters grew colder with each passing day. Jamal's competence and growing camaraderie with the other sailors seemed to agitate the captain, who took every opportunity to remind Jamal of his place. "Don't get too comfortable, Bryant," Roger sneered one afternoon as Jamal finished repairing a section of the deck. "This isn't some charity ship. You're here because I allow it." The comments weren't always so direct. Sometimes they came in the form of snide remarks or dismissive gestures, laced with barely veiled disdain. The crew noticed, but most of them stayed silent, wary of drawing Roger's ire. One evening, as the crew gathered for a rare moment of respite in the galley, the tension finally boiled over. Exhausted from back-to-back shifts, Jamal joined the line for dinner, his stomach growling at the smell of stew. But as he reached for a bowl, Peter, the senior mate, stepped in front of him. "Not so fast," Peter said, holding the ladle just out of Jamal's reach. His grin was anything but friendly. "This ain't a free buffet, pal." Jamal blinked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "I've been on shift all day, just like the rest of you." Peter shrugged, his tone dripping with mockery. "Yeah, but some of us pull our weight. Maybe you're not as hungry as you think." The room went quiet. The other sailors exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing, their faces a mix of discomfort and fear. Jamal's chest tightened as anger surged through him. He stared at Peter for a moment, letting the silence stretch before speaking in a calm, measured tone. "I've worked the same hours as everyone here," Jamal said, his voice steady. "In fact, I pulled a double shift patching that leak in the hull. So unless you're suggesting my sweat is somehow worth less than yours, I'd like my share." Peter's smirk faltered, but before he could respond, a slow clap echoed through the galley. All heads turned to see Captain Roger Walters leaning against the doorway, his icy gaze fixed on Jamal. "Well, well," Roger said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Look who's got a mouth on him. Bryant, I didn't realize we'd hired a lawyer instead of a sailor." Jamal didn't flinch under Roger's glare, but his fists clenched at his sides. He could feel the eyes of the crew on him, waiting to see what he would do. Roger stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "Let me make something clear. This is my ship. I decide who eats, who works, and who stays. You want a hot meal? Start by showing some respect for your superiors. Until then, keep quiet and stay in line." The silence in the galley was deafening. Jamal's blood boiled, every fiber of his being screaming to fight back. But he knew better. An open confrontation with the captain would only make things worse, not just for him, but for the entire crew. Slowly, he unclenched his fists and stepped back, his face a mask of controlled defiance. "Understood, Captain," Jamal said evenly, his voice devoid of emotion. Roger smirked, clearly pleased with himself. "Good. Now get back to work." As the captain strode out of the galley, the tension lingered like a heavy fog. Jamal grabbed his bowl of stew and retreated to a corner, eating in silence while the crew returned to their conversations in hushed tones. He could feel their pity, their discomfort, but none of them dared to speak up. Jamal stared into his bowl, his appetite gone. The storm outside might have been calm, but inside him it was brewing, stronger, fiercer, and impossible to ignore. The calm night was shattered by the howl of the wind and the crash of waves against the hull. What had started as a gentle drizzle quickly escalated into a full-blown storm. The Eagle's grace was caught in the chaos, its sturdy frame groaning under the force of the ocean's fury. Lightning illuminated the deck, revealing sailors scrambling to secure cargo and reinforce the rigging. Rain pelted down in relentless sheets, drenching everyone to the bone. "Hold the line! Secure those ropes!" Captain Roger Walters shouted from the bridge, his voice barely audible over the deafening roar of the storm. The captain gripped the rail, his knuckles white as he barked orders. But there was something different in his tone, an edge of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. His commands came rapid fire, conflicting with one another, leaving the crew confused and disoriented. Jamal, already soaked from head to toe, moved with purpose, helping tie down loose barrels and checking that the lifeboats were secure. He could see the panic spreading among the crew. They were good men, but fear was making them slow, clumsy, and Captain Roger wasn't helping. "Reef the sails!" Roger yelled. A second later, he shouted, "No, let them out! We need more speed!" The conflicting orders caused chaos on deck. Sailors hesitated, unsure of what to do. Jamal froze for a moment, watching as one man was nearly thrown overboard when he followed the wrong command. It was clear to him now. The captain had lost control. A piercing snap rang out as a crucial rope holding the mainsail tore under the strain. The giant canvas flapped wildly in the wind, threatening to rip the mast apart. Jamal's heart pounded as he realized the danger. If the mast fell, it could bring the entire ship down with it. Without waiting for orders, Jamal sprang into action. "Get me a spare line!" he yelled to one of the sailors. The man hesitated, looking toward the captain for confirmation. But Jamal didn't wait. He grabbed the coil of rope himself and raced toward the mast. "What the hell are you doing, Bryant?" Captain Roger bellowed from above. "Get back in line! That's an order!" Jamal didn't stop. "If we don't secure this sail, we're done for!" he shouted back, his voice cutting through the chaos. He didn't have time to explain. The ship needed a leader, and Roger wasn't stepping up. Climbing the mast in the middle of a storm was madness, but Jamal didn't hesitate. The wind whipped at his body, threatening to tear him loose as he ascended, hand over hand, toward the top. Rain lashed against his face, blurring his vision, but he kept climbing. Below, the crew watched in stunned silence, their fear momentarily replaced by awe. Finally, Jamal reached the broken line. The sail flailed dangerously, threatening to knock him off the mast. Gritting his teeth, he wrapped one arm around the wood for support and used the other to tie the new rope in place. His hand slipped on the wet surface, but he held on, his focus unshakable. "Come on," he muttered to himself, his muscles straining against the wind. With a final tug, he secured the line and tied it off. The sail snapped taut, stabilizing the mast. The ship steadied, the worst of the danger averted. When Jamal climbed back down, the crew erupted into cheers. Men clapped him on the back, their earlier tension replaced by relief and admiration. But as Jamal caught his breath, he felt the weight of Captain Roger's glare. "What the hell was that?" Roger stormed down from the bridge, his face red with anger. "You disobeyed a direct order, Bryant. You put this ship in jeopardy." Jamal couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I saved this ship," he said, his voice low but firm. "If I'd followed your orders, the mast would have come down, and we'd all be swimming right now." "Don't talk back to me," Roger shouted, stepping closer. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing but a liability. This ship doesn't need a show-off trying to prove something." The crew fell silent, their earlier cheers forgotten. All eyes were on Jamal as he took a step forward, meeting Roger's gaze. For the first time, he let his frustration boil over. "With all due respect, Captain," Jamal said, his voice steady but cutting. "If I'd listened to you, we wouldn't be here to argue about it. Maybe instead of blaming me, you should ask yourself why your crew doesn't trust your orders anymore." Roger's face twisted in fury, but he had no response. Jamal turned away, walking past the crew who now looked at him with a mix of awe and respect. He didn't need their applause. He didn't need the captain's approval. All that mattered was that they'd made it through the storm alive. But as Jamal disappeared below deck, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Eagle's Grace limped back into port under a clear sky, the scars of the storm visible on its battered hull and weary crew. Despite the relief of returning to solid ground, tension hung heavy in the air. Captain Roger Walters wasted no time. Before the ship was fully moored, he marched down the gangplank, his face flushed with anger and self-righteous indignation. He headed straight for the fleet office, determined to report Jamal Bryant for insubordination and recklessly endangering the crew. Inside the office, Roger confronted the harbor master, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache and tired eyes. Slamming his report on the desk, Roger growled, "This boy Bryant is a menace. He disobeyed orders during the storm, nearly cost us the ship. I want him off my crew, now." The harbor master raised an eyebrow but said nothing, simply nodding and promising to review the matter. Roger smirked, satisfied. By the time the report reached fleet headquarters, he figured his problem would be gone for good. What he didn't realize was that the storm was far from over. Later that afternoon, as the crew unloaded cargo, a black luxury car pulled up to the dock. The sharp sound of polished shoes on the wooden planks turned heads as a man stepped out, his presence commanding immediate attention. James Bryant Sr., the owner of the entire shipping fleet, cut an imposing figure despite his age. His dark skin gleamed in the sunlight, and his silver hair was neatly combed, giving him an air of quiet authority. His tailored navy suit and the gleaming pocket watch on his vest signaled that he was a man who demanded and received respect. The crew exchanged whispers, their work momentarily forgotten. "That's Mr. Bryant," one sailor muttered. "The big boss himself." Captain Roger, standing near the bridge, noticed the commotion and hurried over, adjusting his cap as he went. "Mr. Bryant," he called, his tone shifting to one of deference. "What an unexpected honor." James Bryant Sr. stopped in his tracks, his sharp eyes scanning the scene before him. They lingered briefly on Roger before moving past him to the crew. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I received reports about this ship's return, and the storm you encountered. I thought it best to come and hear the details myself." Roger straightened, puffing out his chest. "Of course, sir. I was just about to inform the harbor master about a disciplinary issue. One of the crew, Bryant, acted against direct orders, jeopardizing the safety of the ship and its men." James raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Bryant, you say?" "Yes," Roger continued, oblivious to the growing tension. "The boy thinks he's a hero, but his recklessness could have gotten us all killed. I recommend immediate dismissal." A faint smile tugged at the corner of James's lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Is that so?" Before Roger could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps drew their attention. Jamal emerged from below deck, his uniform still damp and smeared with salt and oil. He stopped short when he saw his father, his jaw tightening. He hadn't expected this confrontation. Not yet, at least. "Jamal," James said, his voice softening. "I've been hearing quite a bit about you lately." Roger's face contorted in confusion, his eyes darting between father and son. "Wait, Bryant is your—" "Yes," James interrupted, his voice now steely. "Jamal is my son, and from what I've heard, he's the reason this ship is still afloat." The silence that followed was deafening. Roger's face drained of color as the weight of the revelation sank in. He stammered, trying to recover. "Mr. Bryant, I didn't know. If I'd—" "You didn't know because he didn't tell you," James said sharply. "Jamal wanted to earn his place here, not be handed it. And yet, despite his efforts, you saw fit to undermine him at every turn. You humiliated him, questioned his worth, and ignored his contributions, all because of your prejudice." Roger's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. James stepped closer, his gaze drilling into the captain. "Your incompetence during the storm put this crew in danger. My son saved their lives, and yours. And this is how you repay him?" The crew, who had gathered nearby, exchanged glances. Some nodded in quiet agreement, while others stood frozen, captivated by the unfolding drama. James straightened, his voice carrying the finality of a judge delivering a verdict. "Captain Walters, your services are no longer required. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties." Roger's face turned a deep shade of crimson. "You can't be serious." "I am," James said, cutting him off. "Gather your belongings and leave. The Eagle's Grace deserves a captain who commands respect, not fear." Roger sputtered, but ultimately fell silent, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He turned and walked away, his departure marked by the collective exhale of the crew. James turned back to Jamal, his expression softening. "You've proven yourself more than capable, son. From this moment forward, you are the captain of the Eagle's Grace." The crew erupted into cheers, their earlier hesitation replaced by genuine admiration. Jamal, stunned, looked at his father. "I didn't do this to take his job," he said quietly. "I know," James replied, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "You did it to save lives, and that's what makes you a leader." Jamal turned to face the crew, their applause washing over him like a tidal wave. He wasn't sure he was ready for the responsibility, but as he looked into their faces, full of hope and trust, he knew he couldn't let them down. The storm was over, but for Jamal, the real journey was just beginning. The first days of Jamal Bryant's captaincy were a whirlwind of adjustments and new responsibilities. Standing on the bridge of the Eagle's Grace, he couldn't help but feel the weight of his position. The gold-embroidered insignia on his uniform collar no longer seemed like a distant dream, but a reality he had earned through grit and courage. Yet, for Jamal, the title of captain wasn't about authority. It was about accountability. From the moment he took command, Jamal made it clear that his leadership style would be different. He gathered the crew on deck, the morning sun casting long shadows across their faces as they stood in attentive silence. "I know what this ship has been through," Jamal began, his voice firm but warm. "I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I've seen what we can accomplish when we work together. From now on, this ship runs on respect. It doesn't matter where you're from, what you look like, or how long you've been here. Everyone deserves a fair shot and a fair shake." The crew listened, a mix of skepticism and curiosity in their eyes. For many, this was the first time they'd heard a captain speak to them as equals. Slowly but surely, Jamal's words began to sink in. Over the next few weeks, he backed them up with actions. Jamal implemented changes that transformed the ship's culture. He personally reviewed schedules to ensure no one was overworked or unfairly burdened. He established clear channels for grievances, encouraging the crew to voice concerns without fear of retaliation. When a junior deckhand accidentally dropped a crate of supplies, Jamal didn't berate him like Roger would have. Instead, he showed him how to secure the cargo properly, turning the mistake into a lesson. "Leadership isn't about shouting orders," Jamal told the crew during one of their evening meetings. "It's about standing shoulder to shoulder and making sure everyone succeeds." The transformation was slow but steady. Crew members who had once avoided each other began sharing meals and stories in the galley. Laughter echoed through the corridors where tension used to linger. The Eagle's Grace was no longer just a ship. It was becoming a family. Meanwhile, former Captain Roger Walters had embarked on a very different journey. Stripped of his prestigious position, he was reassigned to a small, aging cargo vessel, the Seagull. The crew was sparse, the quarters cramped, and the assignments monotonous, far from the grandeur he had once commanded. At first, Roger seethed with resentment. He blamed Jamal, the crew, and even James Bryant Sr. for his downfall. But as the weeks turned into months, the isolation forced him to reflect. He began to replay his actions, his words, the way he had dismissed Jamal and others like him. Though his pride kept him from admitting it out loud, a small part of him recognized the truth. His own arrogance had been his undoing. One evening, as the Seagull docked at a quiet port, Roger stood at the edge of the pier, staring at the horizon. For the first time, he wondered if it was too late to change, not for anyone else, but for himself. Back on the Eagle's Grace, Jamal found himself standing on the bridge, gazing at the open sea. The ship was preparing for its next voyage, the crew moving with a sense of purpose and camaraderie that hadn't existed before. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. One of the deckhands, a young sailor named Carlos, approached hesitantly. "Captain Bryant," he said, shifting nervously. "Just wanted to say thanks for everything. I've been on a lot of ships, but this one feels Different. Feels like home. Jamal smiled, a rare but genuine expression. That means more than you know, Carlos. Let's make sure it stays that way. As Carlos walked away, Jamal turned back to the horizon. The ship's flag, newly repaired and freshly cleaned, billowed proudly in the wind. For the first time since he'd stepped aboard, Jamal felt a profound sense of peace. He knew that his decisions had not only changed the lives of the crew, but also reshaped his own destiny. The Eagle's Grace sailed into the setting sun, its silhouette a symbol of resilience and unity. On the bridge, Jamal stood tall, his hands resting lightly on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the future. He knew there would be more storms ahead. There always were. But now, he understood something powerful. No matter how fierce the winds or how high the waves, dignity and strength of spirit would always guide him home.